Imagine this. You wake to the sound of distant bells. The air reeks of blood, sweat, and dust. All around you, men clutch wooden crosses and iron swords, their faces pale beneath the sun, their eyes burning with faith and fear. Some whisper prayers. Others curse in tongues you've never heard. All are waiting for something divine that will not come. You think this is a holy war, a divine mission to save Jerusalem. The truth is far grimmer. This is not salvation. It's chaos, greed, and the shadow of God's silence. Welcome to the Crusades, where faith met fire, and mercy drowned in blood. The year is 1095, though the roots of this madness run deeper, winding through centuries of prophecy and power. Europe, a land fractured by famine, fear, and faith, has been taught to see sin in every shadow. The poor rot in mud huts while bishops dine beneath gilded ceilings. The people starve, the nobles scheme, and the church watches, all too aware that hunger and despair make fertile soil for belief. For generations, Europe's kings have been killing each other for scraps of land and pride. But now, something new stirs, an idea so vast it will swallow the continent whole. The Pope himself will call it holy. And the people, desperate for purpose, will follow. But before that sermon, before the words that would split heaven and earth, the world already trembles under the weight of contradiction. The Church preaches peace, yet builds armies. Knights swear oaths to God, then rob the poor on their way to Massachusetts. And the peasants? They cling to relics, to saints' bones, to anything that promises mercy in a life that has given them none. The roads are mud. The air tastes of wood smoke and despair. Men whisper of the East, a place of silk, gold, and salvation. They imagine deserts where angels walk and seas that part before holy men. But they know nothing of it. For them, Jerusalem might as well be heaven itself, far, unreachable, glittering with myth. And then comes the rumor, faint at first, carried from village to village, tavern to tavern. Pilgrims, robbed and murdered. Churches in the East defiled. The tomb of Christ itself in danger. A sin so vast that only the sword could atone for it. Europe listens. And somewhere in the cold marble halls of Rome, an old man begins to see an opportunity. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. First, you must understand the world before the cross became a banner. Travel with me to the heart of medieval Europe. Imagine it, a continent of shadows and superstition. Wolves haunt the forests. Plague follows every harvest. Life is brief, brutal, and soaked in fear. Every storm is seen as divine anger, every eclipse as a warning from heaven. Kings kneel before priests, and peasants kneel before kings. The only thing higher than the crown is the cross, and the men who hold it. The church has power, yes, but not peace. Even within its walls, whispers of corruption fester. Priests sell forgiveness like merchants peddling wine. Bishops trade blessings for land. And the Pope, God's own vicar, rules more like a monarch than a shepherd. His throne is carved from gold, his ring kissed by emperors. Yet even he feels the cracks forming beneath the weight of his kingdom. Because the faithful are restless. And the world is hungry for war. Picture a monk somewhere in France, scratching parchment by candlelight. He writes of sin, of prophecy, of the cleansing fire that must come before the end. He does not know it, but his ink will outlast empires. Across the Alps, merchants speak of eastern lands bursting with wealth. Pilgrims bring back stories of cities glittering with gold, of mosques more splendid than cathedrals, of people whose prayers echo to a different God. To the men of the West, these tales sting with envy and awe. For all their piety, Europe is poor, fractured, starving. The East, by contrast, shines. And so, the seed is planted, not just of faith, but of hunger. For glory. For gold. For God's favor. Now step into the streets of Clermont, France. The year is nearly at its end, 1095, and the world is about to tilt. Thousands have gathered beneath the open sky, their breath misting in the cold. Peasants, nobles, knights, men and women, old and young. They come to hear Pope Urban II speak. A man whose voice will change the world. He stands before them, cloaked in white, framed by the winter sun. When he raises his hand, the crowd falls silent. He speaks of Christendom under threat, of brothers in the East crying for aid. He speaks of holy duty, of forgiveness, of eternal glory. He tells them that God Himself has chosen them for a sacred purpose, to reclaim the holy city from the infidels who defile it. And then, like a spark to dry grass, He promises something no man can resist. He promises salvation. March east, He declares, and your sins are forgiven. Take up the cross, and heaven will open its gates. Imagine standing there, hearing those words for the first time. A life of misery suddenly given meaning. Every scar, every hunger, every failure transformed into divine purpose. You, a farmer or thief or soldier, could be chosen by God Himself. The crowd erupts. They cry, Deus vult! God wills it. A roar that rolls like thunder across the fields. But beneath that cry, something darker stirs. Ambition. Greed. The old thirst for power now dressed in holy robes. The Pope knows what he has done. With a single sermon, he has united kings and beggars beneath one banner, and pointed them east. The Church will gain not only Jerusalem, but control of men's souls and swords alike. It is politics baptized as faith. And so begins the march that will consume centuries. The Crusades are born, not from heaven, but from hunger. Even that first night after Clermont, men begin carving crosses into their tunics. Women cut their hair and vow to follow their husbands east. Children play at being holy warriors, swinging sticks and shouting, Deus vult! As if they understand what blood smells like. They do not. Not yet. But soon the roads will be red with it. From that moment the world shifts. Lords mortgage their lands. Kings call banners. Blacksmiths work by firelight, forging blades for men who will never return. In every village sermons echo with promises of glory. The poor believe they march toward heaven, the rich believe they march toward empire. And somewhere between them, the truth lies buried, beneath mud, greed, and prayer. The shadow of the cross stretches eastward, across mountains, rivers, deserts. And as it grows, it darkens everything it touches. Because faith, when wielded like a weapon, cuts deeper than steel. And in that darkness, beneath banners of Christ, the first crusaders begin to gather, hungry, righteous, and doomed. Their journey has not yet begun. But already, the world is bleeding. You can almost still hear the echo of that first cry, Deus vult, rising like a storm from the frozen field at Clermont. It lingers in the air, in the smoke of campfires, in the eyes of every man who was there. The words are no longer just words, they are a fever. And like all fevers, they will spread. The sermon is over, but its aftermath feels like an earthquake. Men stumble from the field as if struck by lightning, dazed, trembling, whispering that they have heard the voice of God. No one knows quite what has happened, only that something vast and terrible has begun. Pope Urban II returns to his chamber that night in silence. The candlelight flickers against the walls of the bishop's palace, and his hands shake as he removes his vestments. Outside, the shouts continue. God wills it! Echoing down the narrow streets. He stands at the window, gazing into the darkness, and wonders whether this is what God truly willed, or what men have chosen to believe. Because Urban knows exactly what he has done. He has lit a fire, not a holy one, but a political one. And fire, once loosed, does not burn with reason. Europe of the 11th century is a powder keg. The Holy Roman Empire and the papacy have been locked in a cold war of pride and power for decades. Kings argue with bishops, bishops defy kings, and the church itself is splitting at the seams. The Pope's authority, divine in name, fragile in practice, needs something greater than doctrine to unite it. Something that will bind the faithful together under one command. And in the east, opportunity waits. Jerusalem, the city of God, the cradle of Christ's death and resurrection, has fallen to the Seljuk Turks. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land have been robbed, beaten, enslaved, sometimes killed. The Eastern Emperor, Alexios Komnenos of Byzantium, has begged for help. His empire, once mighty, now buckles beneath Turkish raids. He doesn't ask for an army. He asks for mercenaries, a few good men to guard the frontier. But Urban II sees more. He sees a chance to heal the schism between East and West, to remind Byzantium that Rome is still the heart of Christendom. He sees a way to make the papacy not just a spiritual throne, but the general seat of a holy empire. And beneath all that, though he would never admit it, he sees a chance for redemption. For Europe's violence to be sanctified. If knights will not stop killing, then let them kill for God. Word spreads like wildfire. Messengers carry Urban's call to the furthest corners of Christendom. From Normandy to Lombardy, from the forests of Germany to the plains of Spain, priests thunder from pulpits that a new war of heaven has begun. A war not of conquest, but of cleansing. A war that promises what every sinner craves, forgiveness. Men who have murdered, stolen, or defied the church find themselves staring at a new kind of absolution. Fight for the cross, and your soul will be washed clean. Kill for Christ, and you will not die damned, you will die saved. It is the perfect lie, because it feels so holy. In the smoky taverns of Paris, knights brag that they will take the holy city within a year. In the marketplaces of Flanders, peasants sell their oxen and abandon their fields, convinced that Jerusalem's streets are paved with gold. Women weep as their sons carve crude crosses into their tunics with the points of their knives. The blood from the cuts seeps into the fabric, dark and holy. Everywhere, sermons ring with the same feverish refrain, "Take up the cross." And so they do. Thousands, tens of thousands, some armored, some barefoot. Men who have never left their villages now vow to march across continents. They speak of miracles, of sins forgiven, of glory eternal. But beneath their prayers lies something older, darker, more human. They want land. They want wealth. They want a world that does not leave them starving in the mud while lords feast above them. Faith becomes a flag. And behind every flag, an army waits. Imagine the roads of Europe now. The winter of 1096. Columns of men and women moving eastward, their breath misting in the cold, their feet blistered and bleeding. Priests march among them, holding high wooden crosses like torches in the dark. Children sing hymns they barely understand. Old men drag wagons filled with relics, icons, and bones of saints, talismans against the devil they believe rules the East. No one doubts that they are chosen. No one doubts that God walks with them. But if you listen closely, beyond the chants and the prayers, you can hear another sound, the grinding of iron. Because behind this army of pilgrims, real soldiers are gathering. Dukes, counts, barons, the high-born wolves of Europe, have heard the Pope's call as well. And they smell opportunity. Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman warlord with a smile like a blade, sees the East not as a pilgrimage, but as a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Raymond of Toulouse, proud and aging, dreams of dying with a sword in his hand and his name in God's book. Godfrey of Bouillon, the Duke of Lower Lorraine, kneels before the altar of Aachen Cathedral and swears he will not rest until Jerusalem itself bows before the cross. Each of them believes, or pretends to believe, that he fights for Christ. Each of them carries, in secret, the weight of ambition. Pope Urban watches all this unfold from Rome. Letters arrive daily, bishops pleading for guidance, nobles demanding favor, peasants begging for permission to join. His scribes can barely keep pace. Everywhere, his name is spoken as if it were holy. For the first time in centuries, all of Europe moves in one direction. But even as he writes his blessings, Urban hesitates. He knows the nature of men. He knows that once the sword is raised, it does not easily return to the scabbard. Still, he tells himself this is God's will, that if blood must be spilled, let it be sanctified. He could not know that before a year has passed, that sanctified blood will soak the streets of cities that never knew the name of Christ. In the monasteries of Cluny, monks copy letters describing the great expedition. They call it peregrinatio, the pilgrimage. A journey not of conquest, but of penance. They believe it will cleanse the world of sin. Yet already, in the courts of Europe, the word cruciata, crusade, begins to take shape. From pulpits and courtyards, priests bless the first departing hosts. They raise crucifixes and shout, "God wills it!" The crowd answers in waves, not reasoned, not thoughtful, but ecstatic. They believe heaven itself has spoken. And perhaps, in some way, it has. Because nothing short of divine madness could move so many hearts at once. Soon, the land itself seems to tremble with motion, villages emptied, fields abandoned, roads choked with pilgrims. Armies of the Lord they call themselves, though few could tell you what lies beyond the next hill, let alone the deserts of Syria. They follow not a map, but a promise. You might imagine a noble cause marching forth, gleaming in sunlight. But the truth is more human, more desperate. There are no banners of gold here, only rags and rusted steel. No angels guiding the way, only hunger and disease. The Great Crusade begins not as an army, but as an exodus, thousands of souls stumbling toward a mirage painted by faith. And somewhere, in the quiet of a candlelit chamber, Pope Urban II kneels alone. He hears the bells of Rome tolling faintly through the night, and whispers a prayer he cannot bring himself to speak aloud. That God will forgive him if this holy fire consumes the world. Outside, across the breadth of Europe, the first waves of crusaders are already on the move, poor men, farmers, zealots, carrying the cross as their banner and death as their companion. They believe they march towards salvation. But what awaits them, beyond the Alps and across the endless plains, is something far closer to damnation. And so the fever spreads. The world, once bound by the rhythm of harvest and prayer, now beats to the drum of war. Priests bless swords. Children dream of Jerusalem's shining walls. Even those who doubt feel the pull of destiny, the whisper that God has chosen this generation to remake the world. The roads east fill with believers and sinners alike, and it no longer matters which is which. Because faith, when unchained from mercy, becomes its own kind of darkness. The Pope's words still echo across the frozen fields of France. Take up the cross. Go east. God wills it. And somewhere in the distance, beyond mountains and deserts, the city of Jerusalem waits, silent, ancient, unknowing that the storm of heaven has already begun to march toward its gates. The roads of Europe are alive now. Everywhere, the sound of boots, hooves, and prayer. The chant of thousands of voices lifted toward heaven, not in peace, but in purpose. The cross gleams on banners and breastplates alike. The dust that rises from the pilgrims' feet drifts eastward, toward a horizon no one has ever seen. They say they go for God. But listen closely. Beneath the hymns and the sermons, there are other voices, quieter, truer. They murmur of land, of debt, of hunger, of gold. Because not every man who takes the cross does so for faith. Some go because they have nothing left to lose. Some go because they want everything they've never had. And some go because faith, they have learned, is the most beautiful disguise for ambition. Europe at the turn of the 12th century is a cage of desperation. The great lords have divided it into 1,000 fiefdoms, small kingdoms within kingdoms, ruled by men whose swords are hungrier than their bellies. Knights, bred for war, now rot in peace. They have spent their lives learning to kill, but the fields around them are already conquered. There is no more glory to be found in their homeland. And so, the Pope's call comes not as burden, but as liberation. A war for heaven? No. A war for purpose. Picture a knight in Normandy. His name long forgotten, his armor patched with rust. He owns no land, no title, only a sword passed down from a father who died in debt. The church tells him that if he marches east, his sins will be forgiven. But what he hears is simpler: fight again. Be something again. In Burgundy, a younger son of nobility watches his elder brother inherit everything: the manor, the fields, the loyalty of the peasants. He receives nothing but a sword and a blessing. The crusade offers him a new inheritance, not of birth, but of blood. In the taverns of Cologne, merchants listen to the whispers of travelers, that in the east the streets shine with gold dust, that the markets overflow with spices, that silk drapes every window. They imagine caravans and profit, not salvation. For them, the cross is a business venture, one backed by heaven itself. And then there are the peasants, the backbone of Europe, the forgotten many. They live and die in mud, chained to the same soil that feeds them. When they hear of a land flowing with milk and honey, of sins erased and paradise waiting, what else could they do but believe? Their lives have been penance enough. Now, at last, they are told there is reward. So they march, the nobles in armor, the peasants barefoot, the beggars dragging wagons filled with saints' relics and children who can barely walk. They march for the same banner but for 1,000 different reasons. And that is the tragedy of the Crusades, the illusion of unity over a chaos of motives. Faith is the language they speak, but power is the dialect everyone understands. Among the leaders, politics blooms beneath the surface like rot beneath silk. Bohemond of Taranto, sharp-eyed and cunning, sees in the crusade a chance to carve his own kingdom from the bones of Byzantium. He hides ambition behind prayer, his every smile a sermon of convenience. His uncle, Tancred, is no better, young, bold, hungry for glory that will make bards sing his name for centuries. They kneel before the altar, but their eyes are fixed eastward, beyond the cross, toward the crowns of cities yet unconquered. Raymond of Toulouse, the oldest and most pious among them, claims he seeks no earthly reward, yet he brings with him a retinue of thousands and a wagon filled with silver. Piety is expensive, after all. Godfrey of Bouillon, noble and devout, stands apart from them in legend. To the people, he is the model crusader, chaste, humble, a warrior of God. But even he cannot escape the scent of politics. When he sells his estates to fund his army, the church praises his devotion. Yet every coin he gathers is a seed of power waiting to be planted in foreign soil. Each of these men will one day be called a hero, or a butcher, depending on who tells the story. But in this moment, they are simply men chasing the horizon, each convinced that heaven has written his name in fire. The church does its part to keep the dream alive. Monks travel from town to town, preaching that every step taken toward Jerusalem is a step closer to God. In every sermon, they describe the East as paradise lost, a land stolen by infidels, desecrated, waiting to be reclaimed. They show paintings of angels guiding crusaders through deserts of gold, of Christ himself opening the gates of the holy city to the faithful. Few mention the heat, the hunger, the thousands who will die before they ever see the sea. Forgiveness is a powerful lure. To a murderer, it means freedom. To a thief, it means cleansing. To a king, it means conquest without guilt. And so faith becomes a currency, and the church becomes its mint. But not all are fooled. In cloisters and libraries, a few quiet scholars murmur doubts. One monk in Mainz writes in his chronicle, "They go to wash away sin in blood, but whose blood will it be?" His words will never be read outside his monastery. Truth rarely travels as fast as glory. Yet even he cannot deny the strange beauty of it, the way faith can bind the lowly and the mighty under one dream. It is a vision so grand that to question it feels like heresy itself. And so he keeps writing, even as the bells of his abbey toll farewell to another company of pilgrims marching east. You and I walk with them now, down the rutted roads of France, through villages that fall silent as the Crusaders pass. Look closer. Some faces glow with zeal. Others are hollow, already haunted. A woman clutches a rosary and murmurs prayers for her husband's soul. Though he is still alive, she knows he won't return. A boy of 15 boasts that he will plant his cross on the walls of Jerusalem. His hands still shake when he sharpens his blade. An old man limps behind them, muttering that God does not live in cities, that paradise cannot be conquered by steel. No one listens. They march together, these pilgrims and killers, saints and thieves, an army made of contradictions, bound by one holy lie. The noblemen write letters to their families, full of lofty words and borrowed scripture. But in their private journals some are more honest. I go, one knight writes, not for God, but for what lies beyond the walls. Another confesses, if I die, it will be for coin or name. If I live, for both. Still, they all wear the same symbol, the red cross stitched to their shoulders, the mark of Christ's army. It gleams in sunlight, hides in shadow, drinks blood without distinction. Faith has become a uniform. And a uniform, as every soldier knows, can make monsters of men. Pope Urban watches the tide from afar. Reports reach him of miracles, of blind men healed by touching the Crusaders' banner, of rivers parting for the holy host. He smiles, knowing exaggeration has always been the Church's most effective weapon. Yet alongside these tales come darker ones. Villages stripped bare by passing Crusaders, peasants slaughtered for food, Jews massacred in the Rhineland, their killers shouting the same words the Pope once cried, Deus vult. Urban does not answer these reports. He cannot. To condemn them would be to admit that the fire he kindled now burns beyond his control. And so he blesses the armies again, and prays that God's silence is not disapproval. In truth, the Crusades are not born of holiness, but of exhaustion. Europe is choking on its own violence. Every generation has known war, between kings, between clans, between neighbor and neighbor. The Pope's call gives that chaos a direction. For the first time, men can kill not out of greed, but out of grace. They no longer fight against one another, but for an idea. And that makes them unstoppable. Because when men believe their sins are holy, there is no cruelty they will not commit. The armies continue to grow. From the ports of Italy to the fields of the Rhine, new hosts gather, each claiming to be the true army of Christ. Priests bless them, mothers weep for them, and merchants count the coins they leave behind. The roads east become rivers of humanity, all flowing toward one promise, a kingdom of heaven on earth. But if you could stand above it all, if you could see the march from the clouds, it would not look like heaven's work. It would look like a swarm. A vast, unending tide of flesh and faith, surging toward a desert that will devour it whole. The men do not know it yet. They believe themselves chosen, immortal, invincible. But soon, faith will meet fire. And all the gold and glory in the world will not buy their way back. As the last of winter melts into spring, the first crusading banners vanish into the eastern mists. Behind them, the fields of Europe lie quiet again, abandoned farms, widowed brides, half-burned villages stripped bare by the holy army. Priests ring their bells and declare it a new age of righteousness. The people kneel and pray. But the earth, indifferent as ever, drinks the same blood it always has. The motives of men have not changed. Only the words they use to justify them. And so the march continues east, driven by faith, hunger, and the promise of heaven painted on the horizon. They do not yet see that what waits there will not be paradise. It will be reckoning. And so the tide swells. The armies of nobles and knights march eastward in armor and order, banners high, horses proud, their path mapped by the church and sanctified by gold. But behind them, far behind, another tide rises, rougher, rawer, wild as floodwater. It carries no banners, no strategy, no king. Only hunger, faith, and desperation. They call it the People's Crusade. No one commands it. No one can. It begins like a whisper in the wind, a rumor of salvation that slips through cottages and taverns, through smoky hearths and churchyards. The poor hear that God has summoned not only knights, but all who believe. They hear that the gates of heaven will open to any soul that walks east with the cross upon their chest. And so, the poor begin to walk. Imagine it, a barefoot army. Tens of thousands of peasants, women, children, beggars, monks, even thieves, all convinced that God has chosen them. They come in waves, pouring from the countryside like rivers spilling their banks. Some carry staffs carved with crude crosses. Others push carts piled with infants and bread crusts. There are no maps, no supplies, no soldiers. Only faith. And hunger. They sleep in ditches. They drink from puddles. They march toward a horizon they cannot name. And at their head walks a man who believes himself a prophet. Peter the Hermit. Small, wild-eyed, draped in rags that smell of sweat and sanctity. He rides a mule so starved it looks like a skeleton wrapped in hide. But when he speaks, crowds fall to their knees. He tells them that Christ appeared to him in a dream, that God himself commanded him to lead his children to Jerusalem. "Fear not," Peter cries, his voice raw as thunder. "The Lord goes before us. The seas will part, the heathens will fall, and we shall walk into paradise barefoot." The people believe him. How could they not? Their priests have told them all their lives that the meek shall inherit the earth. And here, at last, a man tells them the time has come to claim it. They follow him as if following Moses. Mothers cradle babies and sing hymns through cracked lips. Old men hobble on sticks, muttering prayers against the devil. Children drag wooden swords through the mud, pretending to be holy warriors. To the peasants of Europe, Peter is not just a man. He is the voice of heaven in human form. But heaven, if it speaks, is silent on the road. The People's Crusade has no supply trains, no discipline, no plan. Villages along the way watch in horror as the mob arrives like a storm. They beg for food, then demand it, then take it. When hunger becomes unbearable, piety dissolves. The faithful loot churches, strip fields bare, slaughter livestock. One chronicler writes, "They devoured the land as locusts. And still, they call themselves holy." When they pass through towns that have not answered the Pope's call, they accuse the locals of cowardice, of heresy, of betrayal. Blood follows. In the Rhineland, the frenzy turns darker still. Someone whispers that God's enemies are not only in the east. They are here, among the Jews. The mob turns inward. Synagogues burn. Men are dragged from their homes, women from their beds. Children are baptized by force, or killed when they resist. It is not war. It is slaughter. They call it purification. The Church calls it blasphemy. But the blood once spilled is never reclaimed. By the time Peter's army reaches Hungary, the ground behind them glistens with ash and ruin. And yet, somehow, they keep marching. Across forests and fields, through rain and hunger and sickness. Their prayers grow more frantic, their songs more shrill. Some begin to see omens in the sky, crosses of light, halos around the moon. Others see demons in the wind. By the time they reach Constantinople, the Byzantine guards at the gates stare in disbelief. This is no army. This is a pilgrimage turned plague. Tattered, starved, eyes shining with fanatic light, the peasants arrive at the Queen of Cities expecting triumph. They believe the emperor himself will greet them with feasts and gold. Instead, he stares down from his marble walls in horror. The Emperor Alexios had asked for soldiers. He receives beggars. Constantinople, the greatest city in Christendom, becomes a mirror, reflecting back to these pilgrims everything they lack. Marble palaces, silk markets, minarets, churches that glitter with gold leaf. The poor gape in awe. This, they think, must be paradise. But paradise has guards. The Byzantines, fearful of the mob, herd them into camps outside the city walls. They feed them enough to keep them alive, but not enough to make them stay. Peter the Hermit meets the emperor, begging for aid. Alexios listens politely, his eyes cool as stone. He has no patience for madmen. Still, he cannot simply turn them away. The roads east are already dangerous. Better to send the peasants across quickly than let them rot outside his gates. So he gives them passage. Ships to ferry them across the Bosporus into Asia Minor. And there, beyond the reach of his protection, he lets them go. Peter, believing it divine providence, blesses the crossing. He stands on the shore and raises his arms toward the east. "Now begins our glory," he shouts. "The Lord goes before us." No one notices the storm clouds gathering over the sea. When they reach the other side, the dream begins to rot. The land is strange, empty, vast. The cities of Asia Minor are not filled with angels but soldiers, Seljuk Turks hardened by war and desert wind. They watch the Crusaders from the hills, amused. The People's Crusade camps near a fortress called Zaragordan, still believing victory will fall from heaven like manna. They pray instead of scouting. They build no defenses. They wait for miracles. What comes instead is silence. And then death. The Turks surround them, swift, invisible, merciless. Their arrows fall like rain. The peasants break and scatter, trampled by their own panic. Those who surrender are enslaved. Those who resist are slaughtered. Bodies fill the ravines, vultures circling in the hot wind. Within days, the People's Crusade ceases to exist. Tens of thousands vanish into the dust. Only a handful escape, ragged, starving, stumbling back toward the Bosporus. Among them, miraculously, Peter the Hermit. He returns to Constantinople, his prophecy in ruins, his followers gone. Later chroniclers will claim he wept before the emperor. Others say he simply stared into the fire and said nothing at all. The People's Crusade was supposed to be a miracle. Instead, it became a warning. And yet Europe does not heed it. The nobles, still preparing their grand expedition, barely pause to mourn. They call the peasants reckless, unworthy, fools who tried to seize God's favor without discipline or command. But in quiet corners of the world, mothers still pray for sons who never came home. And the earth of Asia still drinks their blood. Faith, it turns out, is not armor. And hope, when starved, becomes madness. The survivors who limp back westward tell tales of betrayal, of Turks who devoured Christian flesh, of seas that boiled with demons, of a God who tested his children through fire. Their words spread like smoke through the taverns and monasteries of Europe. And instead of despair, they inspire resolve. If the poor have failed, the knights will not. If the meek were crushed, then let the mighty march. The People's Crusade becomes legend, a parable of foolishness wrapped in faith. And behind it, the true crusade gathers strength. Still, something of that first madness lingers in the air, a ghost that will haunt the holy war to come. Because what Peter's pilgrims began, the knights will finish. And what they finish will darken the world for centuries. The blood of peasants will not go unavenged. The cross, once raised by the desperate, will soon be carried by kings. And far to the east, under the same burning sun that consumed them, Jerusalem waits, silent, ancient, unaware that its name has already become a prayer, a promise, and a curse. The fields of Europe are quiet again. The dust of the People's Crusade has settled into silence, tens of thousands gone, their crosses now just bones in the dirt. But the dream they carried does not die. It shifts shape, hardens into steel, and begins to march again. Now comes the real army of the cross, disciplined, armored, blessed by popes and kings alike. They move with banners of silk, with war horses and squires, with priests who carry relics wrapped in velvet. They call themselves the army of God, but their road will be paved in blood. It begins in the spring of 1096. The great princes of Europe, Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, Bohemond of Taranto, Hugh of Vermandois, Robert of Normandy, gather their forces and prepare to march east. Each arrives with pomp, each convinced he is destined to lead. They speak of faith, but their eyes gleam with ambition. Behind them trail thousands of knights and foot soldiers. Armor gleams like rivers of light, but the faces beneath are worn and hungry. They have sold their lands, pawned their future, abandoned families who will never see them again. They march toward a promise that shimmers just beyond the horizon, salvation in Jerusalem. But the road to heaven runs through hell. From the start, the journey bleeds them. They cross the Alps in sleet and snow, horses slipping on ice, men freezing in mountain passes. By the time they reach the plains of Hungary, hunger gnaws at their discipline. They steal what they need. In the name of God, villages burn behind them. By the time they reach Byzantine lands, the Emperor Alexios hears the same chants that once haunted him, Deus Vult. Another flood of crusaders at his gates, this time armed, dangerous, and self-righteous. Alexios greets them with all the grace diplomacy can muster. He hosts feasts, offers guides, promises ships across the Bosporus. But behind his smiles is dread. He knows what Europe's holy men become when hungry. In the streets of Constantinople, the crusaders gape like children. The city dazzles them, golden domes glinting in the sun, mosaics shimmering like stars. To them, it looks like paradise. And paradise tempts. They buy silks, they drink, they brawl with locals. One group storms a palace garden, convinced its marble statues are pagan idols. Another smashes open wine cellars to purify them. The emperor, alarmed, orders them ferried across the Bosporus as quickly as ships can carry them. Let them be God's problem now. Asia Minor stretches before them, dry plains under a burning sky. The land seems endless, haunted by the ghosts of Peter the Hermit's lost pilgrims. Some claim to see bones glinting among the rocks. Others whisper that the air itself tastes of old blood. And still they march. At first, the Turks avoid them, shadowing them from the hills. Then, outside Nicaea, the first true battle begins. Arrows hiss like rain. For the first time, the knights face an enemy who fights not with swords but with speed. The Turks strike, vanish, circle back like smoke. But the Crusaders are relentless. Beneath their armor, faith and fury boil together until they can no longer tell one from the other. When Nicaea finally falls, the streets run red. The Turks who surrender are cut down. Women and children drown in wells trying to hide. And over the screams, the priests sing hymns of victory. It is said the Crusaders wept with joy. They believed they had reclaimed the first piece of paradise. No one counted the corpses. From Nicaea they move on, across the sun-scorched plateau of Anatolia, through plains where even the wind feels like fire. Water is scarce. Men collapse in the dust, lips cracked, tongues swollen. Horses die by the hundreds. The Crusaders strip the dead for armor, for boots, for scraps of food. Some nights, they pray to God for mercy. Other nights, they curse him. The road ahead is littered with their own. And still they call it holy. At Dorylaeum, the Turks strike again. Bohemon's army, isolated ahead of the others, is surrounded. For hours, the sky is black with arrows. Knights die choking on dust, their armor cooking them alive. Bohemond rallies his men, holding the line with curses instead of prayers. And when the reinforcements arrive, Raymond, Godfrey, and Robert thundering down with fresh cavalry, the field turns. The Turks break and flee. The Crusaders chase them for miles, cutting down the wounded, looting the dead. When the dust finally settles, the ground is slick with blood. It clings to their boots, to their swords, to the cross stitched on their tunics. They have won. And in their victory, they forget what they came for. They do not thank God. They thank themselves. Weeks pass. They press on toward Antioch, the great fortress city that guards the road to Jerusalem. Every step leads them further. They starve. They fight. They turn on each other. Alliances crack. Bohemond demands command of any city they take. Raymond swears the army will answer only to God. Priests preach unity, but their voices are drowned out by hunger and pride. By the time they reach Antioch, the army is half its size. But the city before them is vast and rich, its walls high as mountains. They lay siege for months, living on roots, rats, and corpses of horses. Men die by the hundreds each day. They dig shallow graves until the earth is too hard, then leave the bodies for the crows. The stench hangs over the camp like incense of the damned. Inside the city, the Muslims hold fast. They taunt the Crusaders from the walls. Some of the starving knights dream of surrender. But Bohemond has other plans. Gold and treachery open what faith could not. He bribes a guard, and one night the gates open. The Crusaders pour in like floodwater. What follows is not battle. It is butchery. They kill for 3 days. Every alley runs red. Mosques burn. Children scream. Priests bless the slaughter. Chroniclers later write that 10,000 died. Others say 50. None dare count higher. In the center of the city, Bohemond claims a palace as his own. He declares himself Prince of Antioch, for God, he says, though his crown gleams like sin. The Crusaders kneel, exhausted and triumphant. They believe the worst is behind them. But even as they pray, the horizon darkens again. A vast Muslim army gathers to retake the city. The Crusaders, half-starved, half-mad, prepare for the end. And then, something happens that they call a miracle. A monk named Peter Bartholomew claims he has seen a vision. The holy lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side, buried beneath the floor of a church within the city. The soldiers dig. Days pass. Nothing. Then, in the dark of night, Peter himself jumps into the pit and emerges holding a rusty spearhead. The people fall to their knees. They believe heaven has answered them. Renewed with fanatic strength, they charge from the gates the next morning, gaunt, skeletal men roaring like lions. The Muslim army breaks before them. Whether by miracle, luck, or sheer madness, the Crusaders win. When it is over, they lift the lance high, dripping not with holy light but with blood. They call it divine. They call it proof. Faith, once again, finds its price. Months later, they march south at last toward Jerusalem. They have walked through hell and called it sanctified. Every mile between them and the holy city is lined with the bones of the faithful. They believe the suffering has meaning. They believe heaven watches. But the earth beneath their feet remembers more honestly. It remembers the fires, the cries, the bodies left to rot under the sun. To the chroniclers, this is a triumph. To those who lived it, it is a fever that will not break. The road to heaven is soaked now, glistening red under the dawn. And the Crusaders march on, their armor heavy with rust and sin, their crosses darker with every step. They do not yet know that the worst lies ahead. That Jerusalem will not be their redemption, but their reckoning. But for now, they keep walking east, toward the horizon that burns with both sunrise and smoke. The blood has dried on their hands, but not on their souls. And the world, watching from afar, whispers its first uneasy question. If this is what God wills, what does God forgive? The fires of Antioch have barely cooled. Ash still drifts across the blackened stones, mingling with the dust of bones and the stink of rot. The air tastes of iron, of smoke, of something far older than victory, that strange, sour scent of faith gone feral. The Crusaders, gaunt and hollow-eyed, march again. Their banners hang limp in the heat. Their armor rusts with sweat. The crosses sewn to their tunics are faded now, dark with grime and dried blood. But still, they move east, always east, as if the very horizon pulls at their souls. Jerusalem lies ahead, though few could point to where. They do not need maps. They have one direction, one word that drives them like a lash: onward. They march through lands that have learned to fear their coming. Villages vanish before them. Towns bolt their gates. Rumors run faster than their horses, that an army of madmen comes, that they eat their dead, that their god drinks blood. The people along the road do not know what to believe, but they know to hide. And so the Crusaders travel through empty streets, past shuttered homes and fields stripped bare. The sun burns without mercy. Flies follow them like shadows. Their boots fill with blood, their own, from blisters that will not heal. The air is so hot that even prayer dries on the tongue. By the time they reach the plains of northern Syria, disease marches beside them. The wounds of battle fester. Fever spreads like gossip. Men who sang hymns at dawn are dead by dusk. Priests mutter that it is a test from God. Soldiers mutter darker things, that maybe God has turned his face away. They bury their dead in shallow pits, but the earth rejects them. The ground is too hard, the corpses too many. Soon, vultures circle above, and jackals follow at night. Still they go on. The road behind them is a graveyard without crosses. Quarrels break out among the princes. Bohemond, now lord of Antioch, refuses to march farther. He fortifies his stolen city, declaring it his prize, a Christian stronghold, though his treasury fills faster than his chapels. Raymond of Toulouse accuses him of greed. Bohemond calls him a hypocrite. They trade curses that sound suspiciously like prayers. The other leaders press onward without him, their unity already fractured. The crusade that began as a single fire now burns in a dozen directions, each prince stoking his own flame. Godfrey, Tancred, Raymond, and their weary legions push south through a land stripped bare by war. Every village they pass seems to hold ghosts. Every stream tastes of iron. At night, they see the glow of distant cities, Aleppo, Shazer, Homs, and know that in every one the people whisper their name like a curse. As they march, the ranks begin to blur. Men once proud of their noble birth now sleep in the dust beside peasants. Armor and rags mix until no one can tell holy knight from half-starved pilgrim. They are all the same now, flesh and faith and fever. Some go mad in the heat, shouting visions of angels who promise victory. Others desert quietly, slipping into the dark, seeking home that no longer exists. A priest records that the smell of our own bodies was worse than the stench of the dead. Another writes that men began to dream of rain not as blessing but as miracle, that they might drink something not tainted with sweat and death. And yet, when the sun rises each morning, they rise too. Faith has become less belief than habit, a muscle memory of hope. In their wake, ruin blossoms. The crusade is no longer an army, it is a storm that feeds on itself. When food runs short, they raid. When villages resist, they burn. They justify it with scripture. They kill in the name of mercy. One chronicler admits that the Lord's soldiers slew Christians and Saracens alike, for hunger makes no distinction. Another claims that men roasted their fallen enemies for food, though even he cannot decide whether it was true or merely whispered in horror. In truth, it scarcely matters. When survival becomes holy, blasphemy is only a word. Along the way, a new kind of monster is born, not of the enemy, but of the crusade itself. Knights who once swore vows of chivalry now take pleasure in cruelty. They hang prisoners for sport, hack off limbs as warnings, parade captives through camps like trophies. Their priests bless the axe, or at least look away. Every horror, it seems, can be baptized with the right verse. The march continues, not through enemy lands now, but through purgatory. The men of the cross no longer fight for heaven. They fight because stopping would mean facing what they've become. At last, after months of heat and hunger, they reach the fertile valleys near Tripoli, green fields shimmering under a merciful sky. Here, for the first time in years, the land seems to breathe. Streams murmur through orchards. The smell of fruit replaces the stink of death. The soldiers fall to their knees and weep. But even paradise cannot heal what they've become. They gorge on what they find, bread, figs, wine, until they are sick. When local farmers come to beg for mercy, the Crusaders drive them away at sword point. God provides, they say, wiping blood and wine from their mouths. The irony is lost on them. Further south, they approach the mountains of Lebanon, jagged as broken teeth. Here, the roads narrow, and ambushes come with every bend. Turkish scouts harry them from the cliffs, arrows whistle through the dusk. The Crusaders press on, shielded by sheer stubbornness. Their ranks thin daily. One soldier writes in a trembling hand, "We are a host of ghosts who have forgotten how to die." And yet, through all the horror, there is still faith, raw, ragged, unkillable. Each sunrise renews it, if only for a heartbeat. Some still whisper that the pain is penance. That God has not abandoned them, but tests them, shaping them like iron in fire. The thought comforts them, even as they burn. At night, they gather around fires, hollow-eyed and silent. The stars above are bright and pitiless. A priest reads from a tattered gospel, his voice cracking. He promises paradise beyond the desert, redemption beyond the blood. The men listen, though none truly believe anymore. Faith has become a sound, a rhythm to march to, a murmur to keep the dark at bay. They pass through ruined towns, over fields scattered with bones from wars older than memory. They see crosses rotting along the roadside, marking graves of those who came before them, Peter's pilgrims, the forgotten faithful. The bones glimmer in moonlight like warnings. But warnings mean little to men who no longer fear death. By the time they near Jerusalem, the crusade is not an army at all but a moving wound. Every mile bleeds. Every prayer is a whisper through cracked lips. They no longer dream of heaven. They dream of water, of shade, of sleep. Hell has followed them east, step by step, and now it marches inside them. They carry it in their bones, in the scars on their hands, in the hollowness behind their eyes. They do not see it. They call it faith. And yet, the closer they come to the holy city, the more fevered their devotion becomes. Jerusalem, the promise, the prize, the reason. They can almost see its golden domes shimmering in the haze. The priests tell them it will all be worth it. Every drop of blood, every corpse left on the road, every sin baptized in the name of God. They tell them that the gates of heaven are waiting just beyond the desert. That once they reach the city, all this pain will be washed away. The men believe, because they must. Without belief, there is nothing left. Behind them, the land smolders. They have burned their way across 2 continents. Ahead, the holy city waits. Between the 2 stretches a final desert, vast, blinding, merciless. And as they step into it, one chronicler writes, "Thus did we go on, though hell marched beside us, and the breath of God was like fire upon our necks." He is not wrong. Because this march, this endless, burning pilgrimage, is no longer about faith or forgiveness. It is about endurance. About proving to the heavens, or to themselves, that they are still worthy of the light. They are not. But they will reach it anyway. And when they do, the light will not cleanse them. It will reveal what they have become. The desert gives way at last. After years of hunger, fever, and endless marching through heat that scalds the breath, the dust parts, and there, on the horizon, the holy city rises. Jerusalem. The word moves through the crusader ranks like wine through dry grass. Some fall to their knees and weep. Some laugh, broken and hollow. Some stare in silence, unable to believe the city is real at all. They have come so far that heaven itself feels nearer than the ground beneath them. And yet, what stands before them is not paradise. It is a fortress. Stone walls the color of bone, domes flashing in the sun, towers sharp as thorns. Beyond those walls live tens of thousands who will not open the gates. The Crusaders have reached the end of the world, and it does not want them. It is June, 1099. The survivors of the First Crusade, perhaps 20,000 now, from the hundreds of thousands who once set out, gather on the barren hills outside Jerusalem. Their bodies are wreckage. Their armor rusted. Their souls burned down to cinders. But they still believe this is the moment of prophecy. Every sermon they've ever heard, every dream of redemption, leads here. Priests raise their hands toward the sky and declare that the Lord has brought them to his city at last. Fight for him, they cry, and heaven will open. The men cheer, though their throats are cracked and their bellies empty. They are too tired to think, too far gone to doubt. Faith has become their last weapon. Jerusalem is defended by the Fatimid garrison of Egypt, well armed, disciplined, and prepared. They know what the Crusaders have done elsewhere. They know what to expect. The gates are barred. The wells are poisoned. The defenders cut every tree for miles, denying the invaders wood for siege engines. From the walls, they hurl taunts down at the Christian army below. The Crusaders answer with prayer. They build ladders from scraps, drag siege towers across the dust, and fight each other over the last barrels of water. Men die not from swords, but from thirst. Horses collapse in the sun, their bellies bloated with heat. The air hums with flies. Every day the priests walk among the camps, swinging censers, blessing the dying, whispering that God will not abandon them at the gates of his own city. But even they begin to wonder. Then, in the midst of despair, a priest named Peter Desiderius claims to have seen a vision. Christ himself, he says, has spoken. Walk barefoot around the city. Fast. Pray. And I shall deliver it into your hands. The command spreads through the camp. And so, under the merciless July sun, the Crusaders strip off their armor and march barefoot around the walls. They move in silence, thousands of ragged souls circling the city that will not open. From the ramparts, the defenders laugh, shouting insults and spitting down on them. But the Crusaders do not stop. They chant psalms through cracked lips, their voices rising like a single wound to heaven. When the march ends, they collapse in the dust. That night the wind shifts. A storm rolls in from the sea, and for the first time in months rain falls. The Crusaders drink, weep, and take it as a sign. They rise the next morning renewed with feverish resolve. If this is not God's will, nothing is. The final assault begins on July 14th. They drag their siege towers into place, monstrous wooden beasts built from scavenged timber and prayer. Men climb the ladders singing hymns. Arrows fall like black rain. Flaming pitch hisses from above. The towers burn, still they climb. Raymond of Toulouse attacks from the south. Godfrey and Tancred from the north. For 2 days the walls hold. The heat is unbearable. The ground beneath the battlements runs slick with blood and tar. Then, on the morning of July 15th, as the sun rises like a blade, a single arrow flies from the Crusader lines and strikes a Muslim guard through the throat. He falls from the rampart. The defenders falter. Godfrey's men push forward, their towers scraping against the wall. A bridge crashes down, and the first knights surge across. One by one, they climb over the stones, swords flashing in the sunlight. And then, suddenly, terribly, the city is breached. What follows cannot be called victory. It is fury unbound. Centuries of longing, hunger, and fear explode in an instant. The Crusaders pour through the breach like floodwater. No command, no order, only vengeance. They kill everything that moves. Men, women, children. The old, the sick, the unarmed. The air fills with the sound of screaming and steel. The Muslims flee to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, begging for mercy. The Christians break down the doors and slaughter them on the steps of the sanctuary. Others take refuge in the dome of the rock. The Crusaders ride in and cut them down beneath its golden dome. One chronicler writes, "The slaughter was so great that our men waded in blood up to their ankles." Another says it reached their knees. Neither could count high enough to measure the horror. For 2 days, Jerusalem burns. The smell of death chokes the air. Bodies pile in the streets. Priests walk among them, blessing the carnage. Those who survive the sword are dragged into slavery. The Crusaders strip the mosques of gold, the homes of carpets and silk. They melt down silver chalices, tear gems from altar lamps. They call it purification. When the bloodlust fades, they wash themselves in the same wells they filled with corpses. They say the water tastes sweet. And then, when all is quiet, when the screams have died and only the flies remain, the Crusaders lay down their weapons and begin to pray. They walk barefoot through the gore-soaked streets to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place where they believe Christ rose from the dead. They fall to their knees, weeping, their armor clotted with the blood of those they have killed. They sing hymns through sobs. They thank God for granting them victory. The irony is so vast that even heaven must have fallen silent. Outside, Jerusalem smolders. The city that was meant to be redeemed has been reduced to ash. The Holy Land, at last reclaimed, looks like a graveyard. But for the survivors of the Crusade, none of that matters. They believe the world has been remade. That they have purified the earth itself with their suffering and their swords. They kneel before the empty tomb and vow to protect this city until the end of days. They do not know that within a century, it will fall again. They do not care. For now, they are the champions of God. Their sins washed away, their names immortal. And yet, when night falls, some cannot sleep. The wind moves through the ruined streets, carrying the faint cries of those they have slain. It sounds like prayer. It sounds like accusation. A few nights whisper that the holy city feels colder than any they have known. That the silence here is not peace but absence. That perhaps heaven was never meant to be taken by storm. Outside the city walls, the desert waits, vast and patient. The same wind that carried them here will one day erase their footprints, scatter their bones, and whisper their story into sand. The Crusaders cannot imagine that. They think they have conquered eternity. But history will remember this day differently. Not as the triumph of faith, but as its breaking. The day when mercy drowned in the shadow of the cross. The bells of Jerusalem ring, their echoes mingling with the moans of the dying. Somewhere, amid the ruin, a priest begins to sing the Te Deum, the hymn of thanksgiving. His voice trembles but does not falter. And in that fragile song, rising over a city built on corpses, the crusade finds its truest prayer. Not of praise, but of confession. The city is quiet now. Smoke drifts like ghosts between the broken towers. The gold of Jerusalem's domes has dulled beneath a layer of ash. Dogs roam the streets where hymns and screams once mingled. The smell of blood still lingers in the cracks of the stones, though the victors have begun to call it incense. The Crusaders have taken the city of God, and now they must decide what to do with it. They begin with crowns. When the morning sun cuts through the dust, the leaders of the crusade gather in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Their armor clinks softly in the half-light. Some kneel. Most stare at one another across the marble floor, already measuring who deserves to rule what. Jerusalem, they tell themselves, belongs to Christ. But Christ, inconveniently, cannot sit on a throne. So they argue. Raymond of Toulouse refuses the crown, claiming the city should belong only to God. Others whisper that he refuses because the people would not have him. Bohemond, still holding Antioch, sends envoys demanding a share of the new kingdom. Godfrey of Bouillon, quiet and watchful, steps forward. He accepts not a crown, but a title. Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. It is humility by name, sovereignty by deed. And thus begins the kingdom of Jerusalem. Born not of peace, but of politics, not from divine will, but from compromise. The knights cheer. The priests anoint. The blood on the church floor dries quietly beneath their boots. Outside the walls, the dead still rot beneath the sun. Inside, the victors divide what remains. Streets are renamed. Mosques become chapels. The call to prayer is replaced by church bells that sound strangely hollow in the desert air. The survivors, Muslim and Jewish alike, are made slaves or exiled beyond the city gates. The Crusaders fill their new homes with the spoils of conquest: silk cushions, bronze lamps, spices whose names they cannot pronounce. For the first time in years, they sleep on beds instead of bare ground. They tell themselves they have earned it. But even in luxury, they cannot escape the heat, or the dust, or the strange silence that hangs over Jerusalem at night. When the wind moves through the narrow alleys, it carries whispers that sound like prayers said backward. From the ruins of victory, the Crusaders build kingdoms of sand and blood. To the north, Bohemond fortifies Antioch, his stolen jewel. To the south, Baldwin, Godfrey's ambitious brother, rides east into the deserts of Edessa and claims another realm in his name. Across the coast, new lordships rise: Tripoli, Acre, Jaffa, Ascalon. Each is a fortress first, a city second, a beacon of the cross surrounded by a sea of enemies. These new rulers call their realms Outremer, the lands beyond the sea. They imagine themselves as the vanguard of Christendom, a holy wall between faith and infidel. But the truth is simpler. They are strangers in a land that will never truly belong to them. Life in these new kingdoms is a strange blend of paradise and purgatory. The Crusaders, once hardened soldiers, become landlords and merchants. They trade with the same Muslim caravans they once slaughtered. They drink wine pressed by Arab hands, sleep under roofs built by Syrian masons. Latin knights ride through markets where the scent of cardamom and cumin mixes with incense from the churches. Their wives wear veils of Eastern silk. Their children speak in two tongues. Faith may have drawn them here, but survival teaches flexibility. The church, uneasy, tries to hold the line. Priests warn against fraternizing with the infidels. But even bishops enjoy the comfort of shaded courtyards and strong coffee. Gold, it seems, is an ecumenical language. Still, peace is an illusion. Beyond the walls of Jerusalem, the world watches and waits. To the north, the Turkish emirs of Mosul and Aleppo gather strength. In Egypt, the Fatimid caliphs sharpen their resolve. Across the desert, messengers carrying news of the cities fall like sparks on the wind. A new kind of anger begins to smolder, quiet but relentless. The Crusaders call this calm divine providence. In truth, it is only the pause between storms. Inside Jerusalem, Godfrey rules like a soldier, not a king. He patrols the ramparts, rebuilds the fortifications, stations guards at every gate. He fears what all conquerors fear, that the conquered are merely waiting. At night, he walks the courtyards of the Holy Sepulchre, candlelight flickering against the walls. Some say he prays. Others say he listens, for the whispers that haunt the city after midnight. He does not live long enough to see the kingdom settle. Within a year, disease takes him. His brother Baldwin rides from Edessa to claim the crown he once refused. Unlike Godfrey, Baldwin has no hesitation. He places gold upon his head and names himself King of Jerusalem. The people cheer again. The priests sing again. And the shadow of the cross grows darker over the city. The new kingdom thrives in contradiction. Latin lords build cathedrals over mosques. Their masons carve angels beside Arabic inscriptions they cannot read. Markets bustle with traders from Damascus and Genoa, Cairo and Pisa. Ships arrive from Europe laden with pilgrims, thousands each year, hungry to see the city that cost so much blood. They kneel at the tomb of Christ, then haggle for relics in the streets. Faith and commerce become indistinguishable. Gold crosses change hands as easily as coins. The Holy Land has become a business. But beneath the glitter lies fragility. The Crusader states depend on constant reinforcements from the West, and Europe's zeal has already begun to cool. Letters are sent begging for aid, for soldiers, for money. Few come. The pilgrims want holy souvenirs, not holy wars. Meanwhile, the desert reclaims what they have built. Sand creeps into the cracks of fortresses, wind eats at the edges of walls. Every kingdom of Outremer is a castle built against time itself. And time, like the desert, never sleeps. In the city of Acre, a monk writes, "We have taken the Holy Land, but not our hearts. For though we dwell among miracles, we still thirst for blood." He is not wrong. Even within their own walls, the Crusaders fight each other. Princes feud over ports and tribute. Knights duel in the streets over insults or gold. The Church excommunicates, then absolves, then excommunicates again. The holy experiment of Outremer already sours. Still, there are moments of uneasy grace. A truce here, a trade there. Muslim physicians heal Christian lords. Christian engineers build for Muslim princes. The same men who slaughtered each other at Antioch now sit at opposite ends of the same table, their hands stained alike with history. They share water. They share wine. They speak, briefly, as men rather than enemies. And yet, the memory of blood never fades. It hangs in the air like heat, invisible but always felt. Both sides know this peace is only a lullaby. In the monasteries of Europe, the news of Jerusalem's conquest still echoes like a psalm. Poets sing of it. Kings boast of it. The Pope calls it proof of divine favor. But far from the marble halls of Rome, the soldiers who survived know a different truth. They write home about thirst, about the endless sun, about the cries that will not leave their dreams. One knight, dying of fever on the road to Jaffa, whispers to his squire, "We found heaven, and it looked too much like hell." The boy says nothing. He knows better than to disagree with the dying. Years pass. The holy city gleams again, restored by the labor of the same hands that once tried to defend it. New walls rise where the old were shattered. Gardens bloom. Pilgrims pour through its gates, singing hymns of victory. To those arriving from Europe, Jerusalem seems eternal. They cannot smell the old smoke beneath the scent of frankincense. They cannot hear the bones shifting under their feet when they walk the streets at night. But the land remembers. And memory, in the Holy Land, is never still. The kingdoms of the cross have been born. They glitter like jewels set into the desert's crown, brilliant, fragile, doomed to fade. Their kings build castles that will one day crumble to dust. Their knights carve coats of arms on walls that the wind will erase. Their priests bless every stone, though even they must know the blessing will not last. Faith made these kingdoms. Faith will unmake them. For now, though, the banners of the Crusaders flutter over Jerusalem's ramparts. The bells ring. The markets hum. Children born of Frank and Syrian alike play in the courtyards, their laughter carrying where once there was only the sound of battle. For a brief moment in history's long breath, the desert holds its peace. The blood has dried. The swords are sheathed. And in the quiet, beneath the weight of the sun, the Crusaders believe they have built eternity. They do not see the sand already shifting beneath their feet. The sun rises pale over Jerusalem, its light soft as dust. It spills across the stone ramparts, the towers, the narrow markets that now hum with life again. Merchants shout in French and Arabic, monks shuffle through streets once soaked in blood, and the air smells of cumin, sweat, and incense. The holy city breathes, but it does not rest. Beneath the hymns and the ringing church bells, something quieter moves through its alleys. Whispers. Deals. Promises spoken not before altars, but behind closed doors. Because after the swords fall silent, politics takes their place. And in these new kingdoms of the cross, survival requires more than faith. It requires cunning. The Crusaders have learned that God does not feed them, nor does prayer keep an army clothed. The deserts beyond their walls are vast, their enemies many. Supplies come by sea, when they come at all. Without alliances, even holy conquerors can starve. And so, the same men who once vowed to cleanse the land of unbelievers now send envoys to the very emirs they once swore to kill. It begins quietly. Trades for grain, for salt, for horses. then treaties, then shared borders that look suspiciously like partnerships. Each agreement is written in two languages, Latin and Arabic, scripture and survival. Each signed with hands that still smell faintly of blood. King Baldwin I, Godfrey's brother and successor, proves himself a master of these double-edged friendships. He knows when to strike and when to smile. He rides out against the Fatimids of Egypt 1 month and negotiates with their allies the next. He hosts feasts for Armenian princes, exchanges gifts with the Bedouin sheiks of the Jordan. To his followers, he is a hero of the cross. To his enemies, a devil who knows how to bargain. To history he becomes both. When Baldwin rides, he carries 2 weapons, a sword at his side, and diplomacy behind his eyes. The lines between Christian and Muslim, between holy and heretic, begin to blur like ink in water. Traders pass through the gates of Acre and Tyre bearing silks from Damascus, spices from Cairo, and letters sealed with Arabic calligraphy. Knights who once spat at the very name of Islam now wear robes of damask and eat with golden forks crafted by Muslim artisans. The Crusaders tell themselves it is merely practicality. But in truth, it is adaptation. The Holy Land is remaking them, quietly, grain by grain. Even within the Crusader ranks, alliances form in shadow. Knights swear loyalty to kings in public and plot with rivals in private. The kingdom of Jerusalem is a house built on sand, and every lord dreams of making himself its foundation. In Antioch, Bohemians' descendants trade oaths with Byzantines one day, with Turks the next. In Tripoli, the Count Raymond's heirs marry local noblewomen, binding bloodlines that cross faith and tongue alike. Each alliance blurs another boundary. Each one pushes heaven a little farther away. At night, in the fortified halls of Jerusalem, the Lord's feast. Wine flows, music drifts through the torchlight. On the surface, all seems golden, civilized, even holy. But beneath the tablecloths, daggers rest beside every plate. Envoys from Aleppo dine with Templar knights. Fatimid emissaries drink from chalices engraved with crosses. The language of faith is replaced by that of convenience. Everyone smiles too much. Everyone trusts too little. The crusade that began as a fire of zeal now flickers like a candle in the wind, its flame kept alive by politics, by deceit, by the uneasy truth that survival is holier than purity. In the markets of Acre, merchants gossip of new pacts between Christian kings and Muslim emirs. They whisper that Baldwin has agreed to share spoils with a Turkic warlord against another Christian prince. They say he traded holy relics for gold, a church for a fortress, forgiveness for food. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps not. In the Holy Land, rumor is as real as scripture. And so the Crusaders continue to pray with one hand while they bargain with the other. They have learned that the cross may bless a sword, but it also makes a fine disguise for greed. Still, there are moments when these fragile truces shine with something almost noble. In the city of Ascalon, captured Muslims are freed after pledging peace. In Edessa, Christian and Muslim physicians work side by side to heal the wounded from both sides. In Antioch, traders from Damascus bring food to a starving Christian garrison, knowing full well that in a year's time, they may again be enemies. The line between righteousness and survival has thinned until no one can tell where one ends and the other begins. Even the priests grow quiet. The sermons speak less of salvation and more of stability. The people have stopped listening for heaven. They listen for the price of wheat. Meanwhile, the East watches. The Muslim world, divided by its own rivalries, begins to stir. New leaders rise. Warlords, scholars, visionaries who look upon the broken Crusader kingdoms and see not divine victory, but arrogance waiting to be undone. In Aleppo, a young man named Zengi whispers of unity. In Damascus, imams preach patience and revenge. And in the sands of Egypt, the name of Jerusalem is spoken again, not with despair, but with promise. The Crusaders do not hear it. They are too busy building walls, forging treaties, feeding the illusion that their kingdom can stand forever. They forget that the desert remembers everything. Sometimes, at dusk, the knights stand upon the ramparts and gaze toward the eastern horizon. The sky burns red. The wind carries the call to prayer from distant hills, a sound that once filled them with fury but now feels almost like a lullaby. They do not admit it aloud, but they miss the certainty of the first crusade, the fire, the clarity, the simple lie that good and evil were separate things. Now, both live in their own hearts, and neither can be slain with the sword. The Holy Land at twilight glows with uneasy beauty. Church bells answer the muezzins. Markets hum with two tongues. Children of Frankish knights and Syrian mothers run barefoot through the streets, their laughter echoing beneath towers built to keep their fathers apart. Jerusalem glitters, but its light is a fragile one, half sunlight, half reflection from the blades still hidden beneath the peace. The Crusaders call it God's kingdom, but those who live within its walls know better. It is a kingdom of shadows, of oaths sworn and broken, of friendships forged in fear, of faith bartered like spice. In the end, every alliance made in this land carries the same curse. It lasts only until the wind changes. And the wind, in the desert, always changes. Far from the marble halls of Rome, far from the songs of victory sung in Europe, the reality of the crusade has become something different, something quiet, uneasy, human. A long negotiation between survival and belief. A game played in whispers, in back rooms, in the dim candlelight where saints and sinners look the same. The soldiers who once marched to conquer the world now trade across it. The priests who once preached the cleansing of sin now bless merchants' contracts. And in the shadows between mosque and cathedral, the true power of the Holy Land hums, not divine, but deeply, unmistakably mortal. The crusade that began with a sermon now continues as a conversation, one carried in secret, under the gaze of a silent God who watches his children barter the meaning of his name. The years after Jerusalem's fall settle like dust after a storm, heavy, golden, and deceptive. Outremer breathes, fragile but alive, its cities glittering against the endless desert. Pilgrims once again cross the sea to kneel at Christ's tomb, merchants fill the ports with spices and gold, and the bells of cathedrals ring in languages that did not exist here a generation ago. But beneath that shimmering calm lies fear. The Holy Land is a prize surrounded by predators. Every horizon beyond its walls bristles with enemies. Turkish riders to the north, Egyptian armies to the south, desert raiders who slip from the dunes like ghosts. The pilgrim roads run red again. Caravans vanish between the valleys. And the princes of Jerusalem, too few and too divided, cannot guard them all. Out of this fear, this mixture of faith and desperation, rises a new kind of warrior. They call them Milites Christi, the soldiers of Christ. Men who swear vows like monks and fight like wolves. Men who trade silk for sackcloth, gold for steel, comfort for death. They are not quite priests, not quite soldiers, but something in between, a breed born from the tension between heaven and earth. They come first in small bands, knights who refuse to return home after the Crusades' triumph. They linger in the Holy Land, restless, uneasy, unable to lay down their swords. They say they remain to protect the pilgrims on the road to Jerusalem, but what truly drives them is harder to name. Perhaps guilt, perhaps purpose, perhaps the need to justify all they have done. Among them stands a French knight named Hugues de Payens, tall, solemn, with eyes that seem to look through men rather than at them. He gathers 8 companions, brothers, he calls them, and together they take vows before the Patriarch of Jerusalem. They renounce wealth, women, and comfort. They will live only for God. They will protect the pilgrims and die if needed. In return, the king grants them lodging in a corner of the royal palace, built on the ruins of Solomon's temple. And so they take their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The world will know them as the Knights Templar. At first, they are an oddity, 9 men in rags, begging for food, sleeping on stone, fighting bandits in the hills. But word spreads of their devotion. The pilgrims whisper of men who ride out in pairs, fearless, unyielding, their white mantles bright against the dust. They become a symbol of purity in a land drowning in compromise. Soon, their reputation reaches Rome. The Church blesses them, sanctifies them, turns their vow into law. And with that blessing comes power. Wealthy nobles in Europe, eager to earn a share of heavenly credit, begin sending gold and land to the new order. The Templars become rich, richer than any order before them. They build castles, fortresses, commanderies from Portugal to Palestine. Their seal shows two knights sharing one horse, a gesture of humility that time quickly turns into irony. For poverty, it seems, can be quite profitable when wrapped in holiness. They are not alone. Others follow their path, inspired or envious. The Knights Hospitaller, once a brotherhood of healers tending to the sick, take up arms as well. They guard the hospitals, yes, but also the walls. Their black mantles bear a white cross, their swords gleam beside their stretchers. Then come the Teutonic Knights, born from the blood and frost of northern Crusades, cold and efficient as the lands they hail from. Together, these orders become the backbone of Christendom in the East, a holy machine made of prayer, discipline, and steel. The princes of Jerusalem trust them, fear them, and need them. When a fortress falls, they are the first to rebuild it. When an army marches, they are the first to charge. When a debt is owed, it is often owed to them. The cross, once a symbol of sacrifice, has become an emblem of organization. Yet for all their vows, the knightly orders are not saints. Power hardens them, gold seduces them. The Templars begin to handle money for kings, lending coin with interest disguised as fees. They guard pilgrims, yes, but also treasure chests. They invent letters of credit, so a traveler from France can deposit his wealth in Paris and withdraw it in Acre. They become bankers of God. And bankers, as history teaches, answer only to the weight of their own ledgers. The Hospitallers, meanwhile, transform their hospitals into fortresses. Their care for the sick becomes a shield for their growing armies. The Teutons carve out dominions in the north, baptizing lands in blood. Each order begins as devotion and ends as dominion. Each prays before battle and counts spoils afterward. The crusade has not ended, it has changed its form. It no longer marches as an army. It lives as an institution, enduring where zeal alone could not. Still, in the Holy Land, their courage is real. When the Saracen armies strike, it is the orders who stand their ground. They man the castles of the frontier, Croc de Chevaliers, Margate, Gaza, and countless others rising from the desert like teeth of stone. Within those walls, discipline rules, prayer at dawn, training at noon, silence at night. Each brother lives ready to die. And many do. In the burning valleys of Galilee, Templar riders charge against overwhelming odds, white mantles snapping like wings. At Ascalon, Hospitallers hold the gates until their last man falls. They are terrible and magnificent both, holy engines of war. To their enemies, they are demons in white. To their allies, salvation made flesh. To themselves, merely servants of God's will. Though whether God still claims them, none can say. Jerusalem watches them with unease. Kings and bishops praise their bravery but fear their independence. They answer not to crown or country, but only to the Pope himself, a kingdom within every kingdom, a power that bows to no mortal throne. When they ride through the city, the people fall silent. Their faces are hidden behind helms, their eyes shadowed by faith too absolute to be questioned. They seem less like men than omens, reminders of how far devotion can drift toward danger. In their chapels, they pray by candlelight, their voices low, steady, relentless. It is said they confess their sins without flinching, that they fear neither death nor damnation. Some whisper they have seen too much of both already. And yet, without them, the Crusader kingdoms would crumble overnight. Their castles guard the pilgrim roads, their fleets protect the coasts, their coffers fund the armies. They are the iron veins through which the lifeblood of Outremer flows. Even the Muslims respect them, grudgingly. Some emirs trade with them, others spare their garrisons when lesser men would be butchered. It is a strange dance. Warriors bound by faith and by pragmatism, each unable to destroy the other, each unwilling to stop. The desert itself seems to watch this endless stalemate, amused. Empires rise and fall, but the sand remains. Time smooths even holy fire. The nights grow older, their vows heavier. Some begin to wonder if this land they guard so fiercely is still the same land they bled for. Jerusalem has changed. It no longer belongs to heaven alone. It belongs to the living, to trade, to politics, to men who wear the cross not as devotion, but as identity. The holy orders adapt. They become less like monks, more like monarchs. Their castles swell with wealth, their halls echo with Latin prayers and the clink of coins. And somewhere in that quiet, unseen by any chronicler, the purity that birthed them flickers and fades. Still, when the call to arms sounds, they ride without hesitation. Through storm and dust, through the roar of battle, through the endless struggle to hold back a world that wants its holy city returned. The Knights of the Orders fight because it is all they know. They die believing their sacrifice means something, though what that something is, no one can quite agree upon anymore. And so they endure, half saints, half soldiers, marching between heaven and earth, between faith and power, between what they once were and what they have become. The cross gleams on their chests, sharp and bright against the gathering dusk. And as the light fades over the Holy Land, the echo of their footsteps fills the stones, steady, solemn, unyielding. They are both the guardians and the ghosts of the crusade. They will outlast kings. They will outlast the dream that made them. And when the deserts finally swallow their castles, and the sea winds whisper through their broken halls, even then their legend will remain, etched into the bones of history like the faint trace of a blade long buried in sand. The wind that sweeps through Jerusalem's streets carries a strange quiet now. The clang of swords has faded, the cries of Deus Vult are memories swallowed by the stone. In their place are softer sounds, the shuffle of sandals, the creak of wooden carts, the faint hum of prayers spoken in languages the victors never cared to learn. The holy war has become routine, a system, a machine. But every machine has what it consumes. And beneath the cathedrals, behind the fortress walls, beyond the glitter of banners and relics, lie the people who paid for this new world in silence. These are the forgotten victims of the Crusades. The ones who never marched, never killed, never crowned themselves holy, only endured. In the narrow alleys below the Temple Mount, a woman draws water from a well. She was a child when the city fell. She remembers the fires, the screams, the taste of smoke. Now she moves through her days like a shadow, careful not to draw attention. She wears no veil, no cross, only the dust of survival. The Crusaders pass her in the street, armored and shining, their words a blur of foreign noise. To them, she is invisible. To her children, she is the last link to a world that no longer exists. Every morning, she whispers a prayer in Arabic, half memory, half defiance. It is not for vengeance. It is simply to remember that God once heard her people too. Across the countryside, entire villages have vanished from the maps drawn in Rome and Paris. Fields once green with barley now lie scorched or abandoned. The Crusader lords, hungry for tribute, tax the land until it bleeds. The peasants who survive bend their backs beneath new masters and new faiths. Some convert to escape punishment. Some pretend. Most simply keep their heads low, hoping the next army passes by their door. The Latin chroniclers never wrote their names. But if you stood among them, you would hear stories whispered over cooking fires, stories of children taken to serve in castles, of husbands who never returned from labor battalions, of graves dug without crosses because there was no wood left for markers. Farther north, in the hills of Galilee, Jewish communities struggled to rebuild what was torn apart. They lived between worlds, tolerated by Muslims, distrusted by Christians, too small to fight, too proud to vanish. They trade spices and cloth in crusader markets, pay taxes to every side, and pray for peace that never lasts more than a season. A rabbi in Tiberias writes in his journal, "The Franks call this the kingdom of heaven, but there is no kingdom that does not begin with tears." His words will never reach Europe. They will fade with his ink, carried away by time. And what of the Muslims who survived this siege of Jerusalem? Many fled to the desert, to Damascus, to Cairo. Some remained, enslaved or indentured, their lives bound to the same stones that once sheltered their ancestors. They rebuild what they can: irrigation canals, small markets, fragments of families. But the world around them has shifted beyond recognition. Their mosques stand empty or repurposed. Their holy books are used to light crusader hearths. They learn to live in the gaps of empire, in the pauses between crusades, between kings, between the brief mercies of peace. And still, they endure. Because the living always do. Inside the crusader courts, the victors tell a different story. They call themselves protectors, bringers of civilization. They speak of justice, of faith, of divine order. But step outside their marble halls and you will see the truth written in dust and scar tissue. The crusader world is built on layers of conquest. Every stone of Jerusalem was taken from someone else's hand. Every field in Outremer was watered first by someone else's sweat. Even now, as pilgrims arrive from the west singing hymns of triumph, the streets beneath their feet echo with the ghosts of those who will never sing again. Not all suffering is silent, though. In the markets of Acre, you can hear it in the songs of women, old Arabic laments reshaped into new tongues, morning suns lost to both sides of the same war. Their voices rise above the noise of trade, soft but enduring. A crusader might pass them without understanding, but the melody lingers in the air, like incense that refuses to fade. Elsewhere, monks copy texts brought from ruined monasteries, saving fragments of Greek and Arabic wisdom from oblivion. The Crusades burned libraries, yes, but they also spread the embers of knowledge. Medicine, astronomy, philosophy, all carried westward by men who came to conquer and left as accidental scholars. Even in ruin, there is exchange. Even in loss, there is strange continuity. Still, for most, there is only the daily negotiation between obedience and survival. A Syrian farmer kneels before a Latin tax collector, pretending not to understand his insults. A widow scrubs the floors of a fortress chapel, muttering her prayers in secret as she works. A child born under the Crusader flag learns to curse in French and to pray in Arabic, not realizing that one day history will forget which language belonged to which side. These are not heroes or villains. They are the fabric between them, the quiet, invisible threads that hold the age together. And what of the Crusaders themselves, the foot soldiers, the men who followed their lords across oceans and deserts only to die in foreign soil? They, too, are forgotten. Most were never rich, never named, never saved in any chronicle. Their bones lie in the sand beside those of the people they killed, indistinguishable now in color or form. When the wind moves across the plains near Ramla or Antioch, it hums through skulls and empty helmets alike. It does not sing of glory. It sings of exhaustion. In the heart of Jerusalem, the church bells ring again. The clergy march in procession, incense rising, choirs echoing through the same streets where blood once flowed ankle-deep. To the pilgrims who watch, it is a vision of triumph, the city redeemed, the will of God fulfilled. But for those who remember, the bells sound different. They do not ring in victory. They ring in requiem. A requiem for the nameless. For the conquered and the conquerors alike. For every soul the holy war forgot to count. Centuries from now, historians will argue about numbers, kings, and battles. They will chart the Crusades as lines of movement across maps, red arrows stabbing east and west. They will speak of politics, of papal ambition, of the clash of civilizations. Few will mention the small things. The woman at the well, the songs in the markets, the graves without names. Yet it is here, in the shadows, that the true weight of the Crusades rests. Not in the crowns, nor the cathedrals, but in the ordinary lives bent beneath them. At dusk, as the sun sinks over the desert, a strange calm settles over the land. The light fades from gold to crimson, then to the deep violet of forgiveness that never quite comes. The wind moves through the ruins of walls and towers, whispering the same truth to all who will listen: that every holy war leaves behind the unholy silence of those who survived it. And in that silence, in the quiet footsteps of the forgotten, history breathes. Softly, endlessly, waiting for the next song, the next prayer, the next name to remember. The Holy Land exhales, quietly, briefly. The first great storm of faith has passed, leaving the desert trembling in its wake. The Crusader kingdoms stand like fragile mirages against the horizon, shimmering with glory by day and haunted by silence by night. But faith, once unleashed, is not easily contained. The cry of Deus Vult, that once shook the walls of Jerusalem, begins to echo elsewhere, carried by ambition, fear, and the uneasy stillness of men who no longer know how to live without a cause. The cross has found its new direction. The next wars of God will not be waged in distant deserts, but across Europe's own thresholds, eastward, northward, inward. The crusade is changing shape again. And this time, it will turn against the world itself. It begins quietly, as all tides do. In Rome, popes and cardinals sit beneath frescoed ceilings, plotting how to keep the fire alive. The First Crusade has given the Church something it cannot afford to lose: unity through fear, purpose through blood. But the holy flame is flickering. The nobles of Europe grow tired of dying in foreign lands. The peasants grow tired of paying for the sins of kings. If Jerusalem is too far, the papacy reasons, then let new Jerusalems be found closer to home. The target shifts. The names change. The cause remains divine. To the north, beyond the mists of the Baltic, lies a world of forests and frozen rivers, lands the Crusaders call pagan, though their people have worshipped their own gods since time began. The Church names them heathens. Missionaries call them souls to be saved. Kings see them as territories to be conquered. And so, under papal banners, armies march again, this time not across deserts, but through snow. The Northern Crusades, they will be called. The baptism of the Baltic. A holy war fought with fire and ice. The sword replaces the sermon. Villages burn in the name of Christ. Temples to Perkunas and Daivas are torn down, their priests slaughtered or baptized by force in rivers that run cold as steel. To the chroniclers, these are victories. To the dead, they are indistinguishable from defeat. Further east, another kind of crusade ignites. The Orthodox Christians of Byzantium, those once called brothers, are now deemed heretics by the same Rome they fought beside. The schism that split the Church has widened into a wound, and blood is the salve chosen to close it. The crusade expands its definition. It no longer fights for Jerusalem alone, but for purity, whatever the Church decides that means. Against pagans. Against Muslims. Against fellow Christians. The word infidel becomes flexible. And faith becomes an empire without borders. In the heart of France, in a land of vineyards and quiet abbeys, another fire kindles. The Cathars, humble, pacifist, ascetic, preach a gospel of simplicity, rejecting the wealth and corruption of Rome. They call themselves the pure. The Church calls them dangerous. In 1209, Pope Innocent III declares a crusade not against distant lands, but against his own. Knights ride south into Languedoc, their crosses gleaming red against French sunlight. When they reach Béziers, the papal legate gives his infamous command: "Kill them all. God will know his own." The city is razed. Men, women, children, Kahar and Catholic alike, burn together in a single pyre of faith. The smoke rises over the fields, black and endless, and the church calls it righteousness. Elsewhere, in the east, the dream of the Crusader kingdoms begins to unravel. New Muslim leaders rise, Zengi of Mosul, Nur al-Din of Aleppo, and the man who will become legend, Al-ad-Din, Saladin. Where the Crusaders fractured, he unites. Where they scheme, he prays. He fights with both mercy and might, and for the first time, the cross trembles before the crescent. In 1187, Jerusalem falls again, this time not to holy fire, but to strategy and patience. The Crusaders flee. The same walls they conquered with blood now open their gates to Saladin without massacre. The holy city returns to Muslim hands, and the world holds its breath. Europe explodes in fury and disbelief. The kings who once ignored the East now rush to reclaim it. Thus begins the Second, then the Third Crusade, waves of vengeance wearing crowns instead of crosses. Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip of France, Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, all march beneath banners painted with the same red sign that once bled across the sands. Their ships fill the Mediterranean like a second flood. Their swords gleam like judgment. But the seas claim Barbarossa before he reaches Jerusalem. Philip returns home in bitterness. Only Richard remains, a warrior poet whose courage borders on madness. He and Saladin wage a campaign of chivalry and cruelty alike, two lions circling each other in the dust. Their battles end not in conquest, but in compromise. Jerusalem remains Muslim. Pilgrims are allowed passage. The war that began for heaven ends, briefly, in humanity. For a moment, both sides breathe. But faith, once bloodied, never sleeps long. In time, new crusades rise and fail like tides. Children march from Europe believing angels will part the seas for them. They drown instead. Nights storm Egypt and Cyprus, dreaming of empire, only to be swallowed by sand and debt. By the 13th century, the word crusade no longer means salvation. It means opportunity. Popes grant indulgences to anyone willing to fight the Church's enemies, real or imagined. A rebellion in Sicily? A crusade. A war against Venice? A crusade. A debt unpaid? Sanctify it with the cross and call it God's justice. Faith becomes coin. War becomes routine. The world has learned to wrap its greed in holiness. By now, the borders of Christendom stretch not by divine right, but by conquest. The Teutonic Knights carved their frozen kingdom across Prussia, baptizing the dead and burying the living beneath chapels built of stone and bone. The Baltic tribes vanish into legend, their gods forgotten, their songs remembered only in whispers. In the south, Spain wages its own endless crusade, the Reconquista, driven by both crown and cross. For centuries, the Moors are pushed back, city by city, until only Granada remains. When it finally falls in 1492, the Church calls it the Last Crusade. The same year, a sailor named Columbus sails west under the same banner. Faith has found a new world to conquer. But back in the east, the old battleground remains. The Crusader states, those fragile outposts of heaven on earth, crumble one by one. Damascus, Aleppo, Acre, all slip from Christian hands. The castles of the Templars and Hospitallers fall silent, their halls echoing with ghosts. By 1291, the last fortress, Acre, burns. The sea swallows the Red Cross, and the Crusades, as history once defined them, come to an end. Yet the spirit of them, the idea that war can be holy, that blood can buy redemption, will never die. It will travel through centuries, wearing new faces, speaking new creeds. But its voice will always sound the same. In the deserts where it began, the wind carries the echo still. It moves through the ruins of fortresses, through the cracked mosaics of once golden churches, through the empty towers that once guarded roads now forgotten. If you stand there long enough, you can almost hear them, the clash of swords, the cries of, "God wills it!" the moans of the dying, the prayers of both victors and victims. They mingle together until you can no longer tell which is which. The crusade has marched across continents, faiths, and centuries, and now it fades into twilight. But as it goes, it leaves behind a question that no empire, no priest, no soldier has ever answered. Can holiness survive the weight of a sword? Can faith be pure when soaked in blood? The Crusaders never found that answer. They only left it behind, buried somewhere beneath the ruins, beneath the ashes of temples and cathedrals alike, waiting for someone to dig it up again. And someone always will. The sea lies still beneath a gray sky. Gulls circle above ships heavy with men in iron, their sails painted with the Crimson Cross. The year is 1204, and the Fourth Crusade drifts toward its destination, not the Holy City, not Jerusalem, but a city far grander, closer, and infinitely more dangerous. Constantinople. The greatest jewel of the Christian world. A city older than memory, crowned in gold and guarded by the sea itself. To pilgrims it is a wonder. To conquerors, a temptation. To those who now approach, it is a mistake waiting to happen. The Crusaders do not know it yet, but they are about to commit the unthinkable. To turn their swords not upon infidels, but upon their own. The crusade that sails toward Byzantium begins, as so many before it, with confusion wrapped in piety. The Pope has called for another march to reclaim Jerusalem. But enthusiasm wanes. Europe is weary of holy wars that cost gold and give back bones. The knights who answer the call are fewer, poorer, desperate for fortune and forgiveness alike. They hire the fleets of Venice, the merchant republic whose faith lies not in prayer but in profit. The Venetians, pragmatic and sharp-eyed, see opportunity. They will ferry the Crusaders east, if the Crusaders pay. But the Crusaders cannot. They have pledged more than they possess. And so Venice makes them an offer. If they cannot pay in coin, let them pay in conquest. A small city called Zara has rebelled against Venetian control. A Christian city. The Crusaders balk at the thought of attacking fellow believers. But debt, like faith, has its own commandments. Zara burns before Christmas. The Pope, horrified, excommunicates them all. The Crusaders, now damned, continue east anyway. The road to heaven, it seems, can always take one more detour. When their fleet anchors before Constantinople, the Crusaders stare in awe. No city in the world compares. Marble palaces gleam in the sun. Massive walls 3 deep, 50 feet high, stretch for miles. Domes rise like captured skies, and the great church of Hagia Sophia glows with mosaics that seem to shimmer with their own light. The Crusaders whisper that even heaven cannot be more beautiful. And beauty, they decide, must mean wealth. And wealth, in this age, is reason enough for war. At first they come as allies. A young Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, has promised them everything: gold, ships, soldiers, if they will help him reclaim his father's throne. To the Crusaders, it sounds like divine coincidence, a Christian cause, a just war, and the fortune to pay their debts all in one. They agree. They set their siege engines not against Muslims, but against the walls of the greatest Christian empire on earth. The irony is lost in the roar of cannon and the crash of oars. The siege begins in the summer of 1203. The city's defenders, Byzantines weary of intrigue, weary of emperors who change like seasons, watch from their towers as Latin knights charge across bridges of flame. The Venetians, veterans of sea and siege alike, drive their ships against the harbor walls, their banners snapping in the wind. The air fills with smoke, with the cries of dying men who cannot decide which god has abandoned them first. When the walls finally break, Constantinople falls not in glory but in confusion. The Prince Alexios is crowned beside his father, and the Crusaders expect reward. But the empire is bankrupt, the coffers long plundered by its own rulers. Tension thickens. The Crusaders demand gold, the Byzantines stall. rumors spread, of insults, of heresy, of betrayal. The alliance curdles into hatred. When winter comes, the uneasy peace snaps. April 1204. The Crusaders decide they will take what they are owed. And so begins one of the darkest chapters in Christendom's history, the sack of Constantinople. It is not a battle. It is a dismemberment. The walls crumble beneath the hammering of Venetian catapults. Knights and mail scale ladders slick with oil and blood. The defenders, exhausted and outnumbered, fall back toward the city's heart. The sky glows red, reflected in the waters of the Golden Horn. And then, the gates open. The Crusaders pour in like a tide unleashed. Church bells clash with screams. Flames leap from house to house. The air fills with the crack of splintering doors, the crash of statues pulled from their pedestals. Gold chalices melt in the heat. Icons centuries old are smashed under armored boots. Nuns are dragged from convents. Priests are slain at their altars. The streets of the Queen of Cities run thick with blood and wine. The conquerors loot the churches first. They ride their horses into Hagia Sophia itself, their hooves echoing against the marble floor. They strip the altar of jewels, tear down the icons, seize relics said to hold the bones of saints. One knight places a prostitute upon the patriarch's throne and orders her to sing as he drinks from the communion chalice. Outside, the Venetians load their ships with plunder, silk, silver, ivory, gold. They know value when they see it. For 3 days, Constantinople burns. Its libraries, once filled with the wisdom of Greece and Rome, turn to ash. Its treasures scatter across Europe, into cathedrals, palaces, and private vaults where their origins will one day be forgotten. When the fires finally die, the city that was the crown of Christendom lies gutted and hollow, its people enslaved, its glory gone. A Latin empire rises from the ruins, fragile and doomed from birth. Its emperors sit upon stolen thrones, wearing stolen crowns, ruling a city that no longer believes in them. They call it victory. But history knows better. The Pope, when he hears of it, weeps and rages in equal measure. He condemns the act but cannot undo it. And in the East, the dream of Christian unity dies forever. The schism between Rome and Byzantium, once theological, now becomes carved in fire and steel. The Orthodox world will never forgive. And the Muslim world, watching from afar, sees what the West truly is. Not a crusade of faith, but of greed. The holy mask has slipped. Beneath it, only men remain. For generations, Constantinople will carry its scars. The walls will be rebuilt, the fires extinguished, but the soul of the empire will never recover. The Byzantines, humiliated and betrayed, grow weak. Within 2 centuries, the Ottomans will finish what the Crusaders began. The city of Constantine will fall again, this time for good. But in 1204, amid the smoke and ruin, the Crusaders do not think of the future. They think of spoils, of forgiveness, of the strange satisfaction that comes from sinning in God's name and calling it holy. They think they have conquered the East. In truth, they have only conquered themselves. At night, when the flames die down, a handful of monks creep through the rubble of Hagia Sophia. They gather what relics remain, the torn pages of manuscripts, the broken fragments of icons, the ashes of saints scattered like dust. They hide them in the crypts, praying the world will one day remember what was lost. The air still glows with embers. Outside, laughter echoes through the streets where angels once were painted. A monk writes in the margin of his ruined psalter, "They came to bring light, and they left only fire." The Crusades began with the dream of saving Jerusalem. Now, in the ruins of Constantinople, that dream stands revealed for what it has become. A hunger disguised as faith, a fire that burns not for God but for gold. The cross, once lifted in purity, lies blackened among the ashes. And the sea, calm, endless, indifferent, reflects the orange glow of a city devoured by its own believers. The Crusaders will sail home rich and damned, carrying relics and guilt alike. They will tell themselves they fought for heaven. But the silence of Constantinople will follow them across the waves, whispering the truth they cannot escape. That God was never here. Only men. And the smoke of what they chose to call divine. The fires of Constantinople still smolder in memory. Their glow fades slowly across the centuries, like the last ember of a dying hearth. What once blazed as divine conviction now flickers as weariness, the holy flame reduced to smoke. The world is changing, and the cross, once carried like a banner of salvation, now hangs heavy with its own shadow. The Crusades have grown old. And faith, like all fires, cannot burn forever. The 13th century dawns over a weary Christendom. From Rome to Antioch, kings count their debts, not their victories. The church coffers, once overflowing with donations for holy war, echo hollow. Merchants grow rich while soldiers grow poor. The relic trade, bones, splinters of the true cross, vials of holy blood, becomes more profitable than war itself. The papacy still preaches new crusades, but the words no longer pierce as they once did. Europe listens with polite indifference. The fervor that once drove peasants to abandon their plows and march barefoot to Jerusalem has cooled into skepticism, even fatigue. The faithful begin to wonder, quietly, dangerously, if heaven is worth the price that's been paid. The remaining Crusader kingdoms, those fragile shards of empire scattered along the eastern coast, cling to survival like candle flames in a storm. Acre, Tyre, Tripoli, and a few lonely fortresses hold the last line against a world that has stopped believing in their mission. Their knights have grown decadent, warriors turned into landlords, their armor polished more for ceremony than battle. They feast in halls built upon bones, their toast echoing hollowly beneath painted ceilings. Their children, born of Frank and Syrian blood, speak two tongues but belong to neither. The Holy Land, once seen as a promise, has become a burden. Too distant to rule, too costly to abandon. And beyond its walls, new powers gather, patient, inevitable. From the deserts rises a dynasty forged in faith and calculation. The Ayyubids, heirs of Saladin, consolidate what remains of his empire. To the north, the Turks regroup. And from the steppes far beyond Persia, a new sound thunders, the hooves of the Mongols, a storm no wall can hold. The Crusaders watch this gathering tempest with the dull numbness of men who have run out of prayers. They no longer dream of conquest, only of delay. In Europe, the old fire sputters on in strange places. Popes call for crusades against heretics, against pagans, against any threat convenient enough to sanctify. But the word crusade has lost its purity. It is no longer a vow of faith, but a brand, a tool, a spell recited by kings to justify ambition. The common people, meanwhile, have begun to see through the miracle. They have watched noblemen return home rich and ruthless, watched peasants vanish into deserts from which no salvation came. They whisper that perhaps God's will was never so clear as their lords claimed. The silence that follows is heresy enough. In the East, the last great experiment of the Crusades begins to crumble. The Latin Empire of Constantinople, born from greed and treachery, devours itself in corruption. Its rulers bicker over scraps of territory. Its treasury, once filled with Byzantine gold, runs dry. The Greek people, starved and enslaved, bide their time. In 1261 they rise. Under the banner of Michael VIII Palaiologos, Byzantine soldiers retake the city without bloodshed. When the emperor rides through the Golden Gate, the people weep, not in joy, but in exhaustion. The Latins are gone, leaving only ashes and memory. The greatest city of Christendom stands again, but it is a ghost of its former self. The Crusaders, who once dreamed of uniting all Christians, have ensured they will never again be one. The Knights' Orders, those proud bastions of discipline and devotion, begin to wither as well. The Hospitallers retreat to Cyprus, then to Rhodes, clinging to the sea like barnacles. The Templars, once the sword of God, grow rich beyond kings and arrogant beyond forgiveness. Rumors spread through Europe, of heresy, of idolatry, of secret rites held by torchlight. Perhaps they are lies, perhaps not. But envy is a sharper blade than truth. In 1307, on a grey Friday morning, the King of France orders the Templars arrested. They are accused of blasphemy, of witchcraft, of spitting on the cross they once bore. One by one, they are tortured, confessions wrung from agony. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, is burned alive in Paris, his face lit by the same flame that once illuminated Jerusalem's sky. The knights who once guarded Christ's tomb now feed Europe's pyres, and the church that once blessed them now prays over their ashes. The Holy Land itself slips away at last. In 1291, the city of Acre, the last Crusader stronghold, falls to the Mamluks. The walls crumble under siege, the sea runs red once more. Those who survive flee across the water, clutching relics and regrets. The Crusader kingdoms are no more. Their banners sink into the Mediterranean, their castles swallowed by sand. 1,000 miles away, in Rome, the news reaches the papal palace. A few clerks record it in ledgers. No bells ring. No armies rally. The age of holy war ends not with revelation, but with a sigh. And yet, even as the fire dies, its smoke lingers. The Crusades have remade the world. They have redrawn maps, toppled empires, mingled bloodlines. They have opened the East to Western eyes, and Western greed. Traders follow the paths once carved by soldiers. Venetian galleys now sail to ports once seized by Crusaders. Spices, silk, and philosophy cross the seas where once only blood had flowed. Europe, once provincial, begins to dream beyond its borders. And in that dream, in the hunger for distant lands, for gold, for God's approval, lies the seed of what will come next: exploration, empire, conquest reborn under a different flag. The crusade does not end. It simply changes name. The old knights grow gray. Those who once rode into battle for salvation now wander monasteries, whispering their confessions to walls. They cannot forget the faces of the men they killed, nor the strange truth that followed them across deserts, that God had been silent the entire time. The priests tell them they have done His will. The silence tells them otherwise. At night, they dream of Jerusalem, of the sun setting over its domes, of the smell of dust and blood, of the endless march eastward beneath a sky that promised heaven but led only to ruin. They wake to find themselves in quiet European villages, surrounded by peace they cannot understand. The fire that once burned within them has turned to ash. In the chronicles, the Crusades end. In hearts, they smolder on. They leave behind not victory, but memory, a memory that weighs upon both east and west like a stone. For every relic brought home, a life was taken. For every holy word preached, a lie was lived. And yet, even in the ruin, the idea of the crusade remains, stubborn, shining, dangerous. Because men still crave righteousness more than reason. Because even as the flame wanes, it never truly dies. Some say it was all inevitable. That faith and war are twins, born together, bound forever. That the human heart, given a choice between humility and glory, will always reach for the sword. Perhaps. But in the dying light of the 13th century, as the last crusaders fade into history, one truth becomes impossible to deny. No one ever won the Holy War. Not the kings. Not the popes. Not the knights who died for heaven. The only victor was time. And time, unlike faith, needs no forgiveness. The war has ended, but the world does not yet know how to breathe without it. The great march of the cross, that thunder of hooves, that chorus of hymns drowned in screams, has faded into silence, leaving only echoes drifting through the ruins. Across 2 continents, the holy banners have been lowered, the crusader castles stand half empty, and the sea winds that once filled ships bound for Jerusalem now carry only the sighs of memory. The Crusades are over. But the reckoning has just begun. The 13th century slides quietly into the 14th, and Europe wakes as if from a fevered dream. The zeal that once devoured generations cools into reflection, or guilt. The knights who return home are changed, their eyes hollow, their prayers uncertain. They kneel before the same altars that once blessed their swords, but the sanctuaries feel smaller now. The hymns echo differently when sung by men who have seen paradise burn. In small chapels across France and England, you can still find them, gray-bearded veterans in rough tunics, hands trembling as they light candles for the souls they cannot forget. They whisper names long buried beneath foreign sands. They confess sins the church no longer wishes to hear. The priests absolve them, but they do not forgive themselves. For all their marches, for all their blood, heaven never answered. And that silence is heavier than any armor they ever wore. The kings, too, are quieter now. Their treasuries are empty, their lands fractured. The Crusades have left Europe rich in relics but poor in everything else. The papal indulgences that once promised salvation for a sword stroke now seem hollow beside the hunger of the people. The Church itself begins to tremble. It has spent centuries preaching that the will of God rode with crusaders, that victory was virtue and conquest divine. But what victory remains? Jerusalem is gone. Constantinople lies scarred. The holy orders are dissolved or disgraced. Even among the clergy, questions rise like heresy from the cracks. If all this blood was shed for God, why does the world feel no closer to Him? In the markets of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, the true inheritors of the Crusades count their profits. The same ships that once ferried soldiers eastward now return laden with silk, spices, and strange knowledge. Trade has replaced war. Gold has replaced faith. The Mediterranean hums with commerce, and the merchants who funded crusades now build empires of their own, secular, practical, enduring. They do not pray for Jerusalem. They buy it, piece by piece, in the form of relics and art. Beyond the walls of Europe, the story continues differently. In Damascus and Cairo, the minarets rise again, casting their long shadows across streets that once ran with blood. Mosques are rebuilt over burned foundations. Calligraphers reinscribe verses of mercy on walls still pitted by siege fire. To the Muslim world, the Crusades are not victories of arms, but of endurance. They do not celebrate. They remember. For centuries, they will tell the story not as a clash of religions, but as a lesson in patience, that faith need not roar to survive, only breathe. In time, their scholars will preserve the knowledge Europe lost, their cities will grow, and their culture will flourish while the West struggles to remember what holiness truly meant. The Crusades, meant to save Jerusalem, have instead changed the balance of the world. And in the holy city itself, Jerusalem sleeps beneath layers of memory. Its walls bear the marks of 100 sieges, its stones the names of 1,000 dead. Muslims, Christians, and Jews live again within its gates, uneasily, warily, but alive. Each faith guards its quarter, each prays for peace, each glances at the others with inherited distrust. At dusk, when the bells of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre mingle with the call to prayer, the sound rises like an old argument, still unresolved but too tired to continue. The wind moves through the olive groves, whispering words no one can translate anymore. Perhaps they are prayers. Perhaps they are apologies. In Europe, new generations grow up hearing only fragments of the old stories. They hear of heroes and saints, of kings who rode into battle with crosses on their shields and angels at their backs. The truth, of famine, greed, betrayal, is softened, polished, wrapped in romance. The Crusades become legend, and legend becomes comfort. Minstrels sing of valor, not slaughter. Artists paint shining knights, not burning cities. The old men who know better sit quietly by the hearth, saying nothing. And so history begins its second crusade, not of swords, but of forgetting. Yet the ghosts refuse to rest. They linger in the ruins of fortresses along the coast of Syria, in the empty chapels of Rhodes, in the half-buried graves outside Acre. When the sea wind passes through those stones, it sounds almost like chanting, 1,000 voices repeating the same question. What was it all for? No chronicler ever answers. The popes will call it divine purpose. The kings will call it glory. The scholars will call it progress. But the land remembers differently. It remembers the smoke. It remembers the bones. The Crusades leave Europe with something no sermon could have delivered: doubt. Doubt in the sanctity of war, in the perfection of the Church, even in the purity of faith itself. Out of that doubt will grow questions that shake kingdoms, questions that lead to reformations, to revolutions, to a world where the holy no longer commands without consequence. The dream of a single Christian world dies, and in its place is born something stranger. A world of many voices, many gods, many truths, each claiming the same heaven. The very act of trying to own faith has fractured it forever. The Crusaders once sought to save souls. Instead, they freed thought. Unintentionally. Tragically. Irreversibly. But even as Europe changes, the idea of the crusade never truly dies. It lingers in banners and oaths, in every war declared righteous, in every empire that claims to bring civilization by sword. The old justification, that violence can be holy if the cause is pure, will echo through centuries. It will march under new flags. The conquest of the New World. The colonization of the East. The wars of religion that tear Europe apart. Each time, the cross will take a new shape. And men will swear that God still rides beside them. The Crusades are over. The crusading never ends. In the fading light of history, a monk somewhere in France writes the last entry in his chronicle. He dips his quill, hesitates, and scrawls. The Lord's wars are done. But men still hunger for the holy as they hunger for bread. He closes his book and sets it aside, unaware that centuries later, his words will outlive every fortress, every crown, every relic. Time, ever the quiet conqueror, moves on. The castles crumble to dust. The battlefields bloom with grass. The bones of knights and peasants alike return to the same earth, indistinguishable now, equal at last. In the end, there are no victors, only witnesses. The Crusades began with hope and ended with humility, a long road from faith's shining dawn to its weary dusk. And yet, perhaps that is the truest revelation of all. That even the holiest of fires must burn itself out to reveal what lies beneath. Ash. And the faint, persistent heartbeat of humanity, still searching for light that does not destroy. The centuries have drifted on, soft as sand across the bones of the world. The wars of God have ended, yet their echoes linger, faint, persistent, like the tolling of distant bells swallowed by mist. Where once the Crusaders marched, only ruins remain, broken towers, weathered crosses, the ghosts of prayers carved into stone. But the questions they carried, the fever that drove them, still stir in the heart of humanity. This is the long silence after the storm. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint, uneasy breath of the past beneath the dust. The truth beneath the cross is not carved in marble or written in scripture. It whispers, low and human, from the ruins of faith and the wreckage of certainty. When the smoke finally clears, history looks upon the Crusades with both awe and sorrow. They were born from devotion, but also from desperation. They promised salvation, and delivered suffering. They claimed to unite Christendom, and left it divided beyond repair. In the candlelit rooms of monasteries, scholars copy old chronicles, their hands trembling with both pride and shame. Some describe miracles, swords that glowed, angels on the battlefield, holy relics that turned aside arrows. Others write in quieter tones, of hunger, of cruelty, of endless death. And in between the lines, the truth begins to surface. That God did not march with any army, nor choose sides in the sand. It was men who did that, and men who paid the price. The Crusaders sought Jerusalem, the city of God, a place of pure faith, of eternal peace. But what they found was a reflection of themselves. When they raised their swords, the city burned. When they prayed for heaven, they created hell. Jerusalem, that sacred mirror, showed them what they had become. And perhaps that was the lesson none of them were ready to learn. That holiness cannot be taken, only lived. That paradise, once conquered, turns to ash in human hands. In time, the chronicles of war turn into legends, and the legends into memory. Europe forgets the screams and remembers only the glory. The cross becomes again a symbol of purity, not conquest. Its bloodstains fade beneath centuries of retelling. But the Middle East remembers differently. There, the Crusades are not history, they are scars. Stories told in quiet voices under desert stars. Reminders that every foreign army carries its own idea of salvation, and that every idea of salvation has a price. The soil of Syria and Palestine still hides fragments of their passing, rusted swords, arrowheads, coins stamped with strange kings' faces. Children find them while digging in the earth, unknowing that they hold in their hands the relics of a dream that devoured itself. And yet, out of ruin, something endures. From the mingling of East and West comes exchange, fragile, reluctant, profound. Knowledge travels where armies once did: medicine, astronomy, philosophy. Words in Arabic and Greek seep into the Latin tongue like water through stone. The Crusaders came to destroy, and instead they carried home fragments of enlightenment. It is an irony history never forgets. That the wars meant to guard faith helped awaken reason. The cross, the crescent, the star, all symbols of the same longing, the same fragile hope that the divine still listens. The Crusades did not end that longing. They merely proved that it cannot be satisfied by conquest. For every king crowned in the name of heaven, there were thousands of souls buried without it. For every hymn sung over victory, a dozen prayers whispered over the dead. And somewhere in that vast imbalance lies the truth that history dares not speak too loudly. That faith itself is innocent, but men rarely are. In the modern age, their shadows return in new disguises. Nations still march for righteousness, still claim that destiny and divinity walk hand in hand. The words have changed, but the tone is the same: the promise of purity, the certainty of cause, the blindness that follows both. The Crusades did not vanish. They became a pattern etched into the human heart. That hunger to divide the world into light and darkness. To raise banners over graves and call them holy ground. Every time the pattern repeats, the earth shudders with recognition. It remembers. But there is another truth beneath the cross, quieter and harder to kill. For all the ruin, for all the blood, people endured. Muslim and Christian, Jew and pagan, each rebuilt their lives from the wreckage, found ways to trade, to speak, to coexist. Empires burned, but humanity kept walking forward, one weary step at a time. The real miracle of the Crusades is not their victories, or their relics. It is that, after centuries of hatred, the survivors still found ways to plant gardens on battlefields, to rebuild homes on sacred ashes, to love in the ruins of ideology. Faith could burn, but compassion somehow smoldered on. In the old churches of Europe, faded murals still show knights in shining armor kneeling before the gates of Jerusalem. Their faces are idealized, untouched by time. But in the cracks of the paint, you can glimpse the truth that seeps through like blood through linen, that no war for heaven ever stays pure. The stones know it. The soil knows it. And perhaps, at last, we do too. Because when we strip away the glory and the guilt, what remains of the Crusades is not holiness or heresy, but humanity. The endless, yearning attempt to find meaning in suffering, to touch the divine through our own imperfection. The cross still stands, weathered and worn, its wood darkened by the breath of centuries. It no longer commands armies or crowns kings. It simply endures. A reminder that the search for God is not in the banners we raise, but in the mercy we grant. And maybe that is the final truth beneath it all. That salvation was never waiting in Jerusalem, nor Rome, nor Mecca. It was always in the hands of those who could look upon an enemy and still see a soul. Now the night deepens. The echoes of the Crusades fade into the hush of history. Across the silent deserts, the sea winds, the ruined battlements, only the stars remain. The same stars the Crusaders once followed east, still cold, still indifferent, still shining. Their light touches every ruin, every grave, every church and mosque alike. And in that shared illumination, the past finds its peace. The armies are gone. The voice is quiet. The dust settles. And the truth, stripped of glory, of fear, of righteousness, lies bare at last beneath the cross. That we are all seekers, stumbling through the dark. And that God, if He speaks at all, speaks softly. Not in fire, nor in battle, but in the silence that follows. And so, as the centuries drift away, the story ends as it began. With faith, and with fire, and with the fragile hope that someday we will learn to tell them apart. May these echoes of the past guide you gently into dreams, where the Crusades are over at last, and peace, patient and unspoken, waits beyond the horizon.